Good morning and welcome to this lovely sunny weekly review. I hope everyone has got the incoming heatwave arriving where you are. And we've got a lovely panel. We've got Lucy, Catherine and Brent this morning. Brent wearing his lovely Teachers Talk Radio shirt there. Oh, and Catherine as well. I feel I should have put mine
I'm
on.
the odd one out, but I have got
You got your mug. I'm the horrific unbranded person. I will get them for next time.
We'll get Tom Rogers on.
I'm blaming the summer holidays. But yeah, I hope everyone is, we're about a good halfway through, aren't we? I hope everyone's feeling far more relaxed and chilled about everything. But we've got three kind of interesting stories for today. Our first one is all about kind of SEND. Now, I know that we've talked about this on multiple shows and I've been a bit kind of ranter about it as a kid with the EHCP in my household about the state of this. And I think for me, I feel like finally at least somebody's shining a light on it. So it was in The Guardian, they said about in an interview that special education needs system in England is in utter disarray. And I think I can completely kind of agree with that it's just not been kind of looked at in the last few years and it really needed a bit of a shift. So we'll see whether it happens, but he talks about how the money available is not sufficient to provide the service that children are entitled to. It means that young people and their families don't get the help they need and lose vital weeks, months and years of education and development as a result. Catherine, what did you think of this article?
Well, like you, I've got recent and personal experience of navigating this system, and as somebody who's sort of educated, articulate, and so forth, and able to access resources. I had to, access legal advice at one point. It's shocking that it is in such disarray. I think that's the right word, that only particular people can fight for the access they need. It's wrong. I mean, I'm happy in the sense that I have managed it, but it's not fair that, you need to be middle class essentially and educated to often navigate these systems. You think, real sadness about the children that are not able to have parents to advocate for them and do get left behind. We have an increasing incidence of need. We have rising need. We have rising diagnosis. We have all kinds of, factors that are forming this perfect storm. And like you, I'm really happy that we are finally looking at it and taking it seriously, if this article is a catalyst for that. But it is in utter disarray, absolutely.
And I think that's it as well. And you and me, we've got skin in the game. We know the system as well, and it's still been really difficult. And I know people with kids that I'm like, your kid really needs an EHCP, and they've really struggled, and like not having that kind of educational background and knowing what to say makes it even more difficult. So, Lucy, what was your opinion on this?
I mean, it's sort of yet another thing as far as sort of my feelings are concerned. And I mean, I'm sure all of you have met, SENCOs, we all work hard as teachers, but SENCOs are some of the hardest working people I have ever met in my life. They are so overrun. They are so overwhelmed, as are the additional services that feed into what SENCOs do as well. And then, of course, I'm going to bring teachers into it who are often aware of children in their class, as you mentioned, Hannah, who need that support, need that extra help, and they're trying to advocate as well on top of everything else they are doing. And there's just so much happening here. It needs to be properly addressed. It needs to be dealt with. It needs to be dealt with in a way that's manageable for both parents of these children who need that additional support, as well as the teachers who are trying to advocate, trying to be there for them, and are finding that they're getting doors shut in their faces as well. They're not able to devote as much energy to it because they've got often 29 other children who need various additional things as well.
And I know that like everyone's saying that, the social workers are all kind of overloaded and that's kind of a reason. And how do we fix the system, Brent? Like, where has it gone so wrong?
Well, I think that it goes all the way to the top. The article does say the crisis has been 10 years in the making. Councils and government should have anticipated the issues when the Children's and Families Act of 2014 was brought in. And there it goes with the lack of integration between social work, community schools, and unfortunately schools are the last sort of point of contact. I think and a lot of schools are trying to meet the needs as much as they can with one hand tied behind their back from the lack of funding, no educational psychologists. Where's CAMS these days? Where's the team around children? We used to have school nurses. There used to be so much more support there. See, what you have is a perfect storm of increased demand, and we are seeing increased demand. And parents are becoming more aware of their children's needs, and that's a good thing. At the same time, our capacity in schools to meet those needs seems to be curtailed because local authorities, by budget cuts, just don't have the capacity. So you have this perfect storm of an increased amount of demand for something and a decreased supply. Now, you don't need to study economics to know that that's something that's not working. And that has taken long enough. It's taken far, far too long not to be recognized as a broken system. But I think this is just another example of a broken public service and a lack of just that coordination that you get between the different services. I think, unfortunately, what we see in schools now, because we're front facing service, is that a lot of your SENCO, a lot of your TAs, they're getting the brunt of some parental anger. And I fully understand that parental anger because, as you two could testify, you have to fight the system. And then, and you have to fight hard. And those people with a culture of capital and the noose is what you're saying, Catherine, have that ability to shout loudly and put the pressure on. But what do you do with those children who just don't have that parent in the corner? What do you do with those children who come from less economic backgrounds, so whose needs aren't even identified, never mind being met? And that is leading to your behavioral problems. And I have seen children present in ways that I've never known. And that's leading schools to having what? Situations where they're having more children who are excluded because they have unmet needs. So it's a perfect storm that needs sorting. And I think this is one that has to be one of the top priorities of the government. And I'm glad that it's been highlighted because it has a massive impact on schools, but also at the heart of it is a child who's just not getting needs that they want. I would equate it to going into a restaurant, and you go into a restaurant and somebody orders a certain amount of food, and imagine that you only have a certain amount of ingredients in the restaurant. That's what school's like at the moment. We've only got so many ingredients, and somebody's asking for a vegetarian option, and we're saying, sorry, you've got no vegetarian options. This will have to do instead. That's not how services work, and schools are trying to service with one hand tied behind their back, and that's just going to stop.
And that's the thing. I think like the funding hasn't changed either for like 10 years. And like with my son, he's been a speech unit for 3 years. So he's only been in a class of 10 and he's now moving to a class of 30 and they don't have the TAs to be able to give him a one-to-one. I was like, he can't talk properly. He can't speak properly and he can't hear properly. So, but he's going to have no one to help him, only in specific lessons because the funding doesn't stretch to have that one-to-one, even though it's written there. So it's really difficult, and I hope that they kind of sort it out so that these kids actually get the support, so that school's like a positive experience. Because this thing, it can become this negative thing, and that follows on to secondary school, and then you get anxiety and they don't want to attend. So it's really important for the kids that we're getting it right as well. Right, on to story number 2. Okay, story number 2, surprise, surprise, is the riot. So the roles of schools in healing our communities. I think the riots have been all over our news this week and have been, I think, like almost kind of a bit of a shock that this is kind of happened and the way it's happened, because it doesn't kind of link necessarily with what happened to those poor 3 children that were murdered. And it's a really difficult with how to deal with this, because they're going to be people in schools that are going to be teaching those refugee kids in schools where the kids and those kids' parents have gone on these riots and tried to burn down the hotels that they're staying in. So it's such a tricky situation, but also that it's, again, another thing that teachers are going to have to do, and teachers are going to have to educate. And I yesterday was in the city where I live, and they were doing a peaceful protest about kind of supporting people of different ethnicities living in our city, and it was really lovely and beautiful, and everyone was welcome. But there were some anti-protesters, but the bizarrest thing is that they had anti-LGBT and anti-trans signs, and we were kind of a bit like, you completely missed that isn't what this is about. So it's like, for them to think, oh, I'm going to go and anti-protest this protest of peace and do that. But I'm like, how are these people completely missed the point? that they're so uneducated that they don't kind of even get it. And it made me realize how much work we're going to have to do to really kind of counteract this. Lucy, what's your opinion on it?
I mean, I actually went back to the UK as all this was happening, as the situation in Southport was unfolding, and I was watching sort of the following days unfold. And I'm thinking, teachers from primary up are going to have their work cut out, and I honestly would struggle to know what to do and say when if it was me going back in September in the UK. There's nothing in the sort of proverbial teacher manual about this. No one prepares you for this. And I think that head teachers have got to step up here and ensure that their staff are fully briefed in how they need to and want to handle this. I know that, and certainly from listening to Tom Rogers' show earlier in the week about all of this, that different head teachers are going to handle it in different ways. But it's hard to know whether to do assemblies, whether to just deal with situations as they come. Certainly, with the various conflicts going on in the world, I know my school has taken a neutral stance, and we've been told to just kind of deal with things as they arise. This, I feel, from a UK standpoint, is a little bit different because it impacts so many people, and because it's going to be so much a part of, and it's not going to go away either. This is something that's just going to be ongoing, and I think that it needs to be very carefully thought through, very carefully engineered, and that teachers need support with this. They need to have understanding. They can't just be expected to go back and to just deal with this. It needs to be a wider discussion. It needs to be something that they feel they can have support with as well, and they, without also putting themselves in danger. And there is, I think, an aspect of that as well, because teachers are part of their communities, and they are part of, they are pillars of their community. So they also need to understand and need to be aware of treading carefully as well, so as to not sort of appear like they're favoring a particular side or anything like that. So it's a very, very delicate situation at the moment. And I hope that, I wish teachers sort of all the luck going back, as I would generally, but it'd be very difficult. It's going to be very difficult to handle.
And I think that the article by Schools Weeks has a lovely quote in it. But if our work is about developing their minds, then we must also appeal to their hearts and souls. And I do think that we do need to develop kind of good kids that hearts are in the right place and know the difference between right and wrong and the way to speak to people. But Catherine, how do we do this? How do we make those kids feel kind of welcome back in the school? And how do we kind of, especially, I think it's easier once they are back in that routine, but that first bit where they've kind of had all that time at home with potentially parents that have been involved in this, and potentially as well parents that have now going to go to jail, or even there was the 14-year-old boy as well who was charged, wasn't there? How do we kind of deal with the big range of almost that we've got to tackle?
It's just unimaginable, really. It's really hard because I think and I remember when this happened, similar riots in 2011, and I remember feeling very distressed and worried about going back. And we did go back and we did have conversations, and if you think about the response that schools have had to COVID as well, I mean, certainly in our school, our head teacher always says, we will control the message, cut out the noise, and we will tell you what you need to know so that we can move forward together as a community. And I think that's really powerful. But, I do think it's a much wider societal issue. I mean, this hasn't come from nowhere. I think that there are all kinds of causes why people feel so disenfranchised. They're often, I don't think, the ones they actually articulate as why they are disenfranchised. There's proxies and there's, scapegoating and things like that. But we have got a really unequal society, and that has led to disenfranchisement. And I think sort of saying you're bad, you're stupid, and you're wrong, although the things that have happened are bad and stupid and wrong, to make a person feel, it's almost like when we say to children, I'm not saying you're a bad person, I'm saying that behavior was bad. And I think we have to be really careful about that distinction so that we don't compound the sense of shame that comes with what's happened, where people might be feeling that.
And Brent, do you feel that just leaving schools to be able to do this and pick and choose how they do it is the right way? Or do we need some kind of government guidance to make sure everybody's delivering the same message, that we take this opportunity so everyone is getting it? Or is it kind of, do we know that all schools, do they have the best leadership that are going to deliver this in the right way? Can we trust that this isn't going to be one of those that it's just a tick box exercise, we've said something, and actually it doesn't have the impact that it needs to?
Yeah, I mean, having lived experience. So when you read that title at the bottom, after the riots, the roles of schools in healing our communities, deeply ironic, having someone who, as a child, was surrounded by rioting and civil unrest, which is quite ironic. The thing is that school was a safe place, and school should be a safe place. I could forget the troubles when I went to school because school was a neutral zone. School was a place I went to learn. My teachers were consistent. They didn't judge. They listened. They were, I now understand he as well went into their place of work and forgot their troubles as well. So school needs to sort of bear in mind the bulk of children weren't involved in those riots. The bulk of children aren't like that. But those that are, our job is to try and rescue them, isn't it? Our job is to try and redeem, and retribution should not be where school should be at. We should be teaching about consequences and morality and respect and pride. And we should be looking at building those communities, and we should look at tolerance, and all of those things need to be done. But schools need to be brave, because there is a propensity now to try and play it safe because we don't want to upset people. No, have radical candor, have the conversations. And if you have to have awkward conversations with some parents, then have those awkward conversations with some parents, say, I'm really, really sorry, but you were seen on social media. We don't think that's appropriate. And we would like you to have a conversation with us about that. And that's the problem, is that people tiptoe around the issues and sometimes don't want to offend. But actually, you have the courage to stand up for the convictions of what's right and wrong. And sorry, something's going by. And the thing is that what's right and wrong is what we are as a school set in our ethos. And most schools have very, very strong ethos and values. And I think that's where we start. What's the purpose of education? Is that education. Kids make mistakes. We're meant to educate. So we don't judge, but we educate. And the thing about education, it has to be somewhere along the line where mistakes are acknowledged, people are allowed to express that they've made a mistake, or equally that they are, I suppose, able to be redeemed. And I do like what Catherine's saying there about, the idea of saying, oh, you're wrong, and this is a good person, this is a bad person, building what Lucy's saying about taking sides and them and us. Schools need to be that neutral zone. Schools need to be that place where people can feel as if they're equal and there's fairness and there's equality. And that can be difficult sometimes because schools are getting dragged into all this culture wars nonsense and everything else. And you're just one mistake away or one issue away from a local newspaper running a headline. And that can't help either. So I think the media need to be held accountable. I think the government need to back and support schools, need to back and support head teachers. And honestly, I think communities need to reintegrate with their schools. Communities need to know that the school isn't just for their people, it's for everybody. And I think that's where it has to be, that schools should be a place where everybody can go, where everybody can feel that they're part of something. And I think that can help the rest of the community, but that's what schools should be about.
Very eloquently put. Before we go on to our last story, we're just going to have a little look at our sponsors, John Cat.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Cat Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. John Cat have an exceptional collection of book titles that cover a range of educational topics, ideas and research. The books are aimed at forward-thinking schools and support best practice teaching for both primary and secondary education. Level up your professional development today and visit johncatbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
And our final story links really well with our lovely sponsor, John Catt, is that it's an article in Test that says how quality CPD could help solve the teacher recruitment crisis. So this was an interview talking with Tom Rees, who's CEO of Ormiston Academy Trust, and Josh Goodrich, CEO of Step Lab. And they were talking about how kind of good professional development can really help teacher retention. There was a recent survey of over 9,000 teachers show that attitudes about the impact of CPD on performance are not positive. And the survey asked whether CPD helped to improve their performance. A quarter of teachers said it did not. So is it that we're just failing with the level of CPD we're giving teachers? I know I had a show with Danielle a little while ago because we're both doing masters, and I find that it has a positive effect on my classroom doing good CPD. I've gone out and hunted that myself as opposed to the school delivering it. So, Brent, you've been in this game a while. Does a school that can deliver really good CPD make a good impact and help you? Or is it that, like, kind of actually it does it as you get through it, you're like, it's that whole, oh, I've heard it all before? Or does it keep you engaged?
Both. I mean, Adam and I actually met through CPD. We did our masters in 2013. And I was 10 years into my teaching career, and it did refresh me. But again, like you said, Hannah, I sought that out myself. I sought my own development out. And good CPD is important because a good teacher is always constantly evaluating and constantly thinking and constantly, honing their craft. Yeah, I often, had somebody when I started teaching said to me, oh, I've been teaching 30 years. And my response to them was, you'd be driving a car for 30 years and be a terrible driver. That's my dad, by the way. But you could be a teacher for 30 years and be a terrible teacher. So you have to constantly, and I think to survive in the modern teaching game anyway, you have to be CPD'd because everything's evolving so fast. Look at what we did during COVID. Like you mentioned COVID earlier on. Look how quickly we did remote learning, hybrid learning, AI is coming in. You have to constantly do CPD. So I would throw back to these two CEOs probably on 400 grand. That maybe they should probably think long and hard about the things that keep people out of teaching. That's the timetabling, lack of flexible time, budget constraints, the state of their buildings. They think that CPD is one of the things that would solve it. It's a small, tiny part, because the things that really irk us teachers, the things outside our control, the number of classes we have, the number of children we have, the lack of support, the curriculum we've got to teach, the exam system. Where do I start? So good CPD can help redeem you a little bit, but let's be honest, it's not exactly high on my Maslow hierarchy of why people are not keep staying in teaching. Let's be honest. I think it's a small, tiny part that might help some individuals, but the rest of us, it's the day and day bread and butter that's driving us out of teaching, isn't it? Really, not CPD.
I find your point interesting, as I used to work for that trust, and I heard recently that they've made a lot of the lead practitioners redundant, who were the subject specialists that went in and supported good CPD in the schools. So it's interesting that they're talking about this, but kind of changing it within that trust. So it's interesting, isn't it? How do we do good CPD, and how do you spend that money well? And is it kind of, does it need to be filtered down into schools more than having these kind of higher people up? It's interesting. What do you think is the best kind of CPD that you've had, Catherine? Has it made you kind of stay in teaching, or is it like actually it doesn't make a difference?
Well, can open worms everywhere. Yeah. I'm literally doing my doctoral thesis. I was writing it up this morning before I came on here, which is all about what is the problem with CPD. And I'm becoming more and more convinced that the CPD itself is actually a bit of a side issue, like the content of it, its implementation. And, I think some school leaders could really pick up a book on business leadership and organizational change. Edgar Schein, read him, love him. But it's really, that seems to me that as professionals, which we are, we have a view that our experience, as Brent has alluded to, somehow equals our expertise. And in many cases it does, but it doesn't necessarily equal expertise. And one of the things that as professionals using our judgment, we I think can struggle with if we're in an environment which is pushing us towards some kind of managerial measuring, standardizing system, is that we resist it because we're professionals with our judgment. But ultimately, change doesn't just happen. We can be responsible for ourselves, but educational systemic level, we do need a theory of change and an implementation strategy. And I know they exist, and I know they're coming into teaching, and the EEF has a policy that we can read and find out about that guidance. But it's something that's, I think, quite new into the teaching domain. And I think if we can get the implementation right and have clear ideas about what our individual schools, what are our things we need to solve, what do we need to address, and then how are we actually going to implement the change we need to see in our organizations, at the same time as making people less, because learning anxiety, if you're going to learn something new, you're going to be temporarily incompetent, and that's scary if you're also going to be measured. So we've got to get that psychological safety right. We've got to have good, robust implementation strategies, and then you can worry about the actual thing you're going to teach people. That's like a secondary consideration. That if the pipeline's broken, it doesn't matter how well it works if it's not working.
The article does say about separating professional developments with performance management. So it does kind of allude to that. And I think that is a really good point, that we need to create a safe space where teachers are okay to take risk. And we've got so much knowledge in terms of the kind of what is going on in terms of how children learn. But like you said, I think the biggest part is how schools implement it and how good your leadership is to get everybody on the same page. Everybody's enthusiastic about it. And like I said, I think the EDF did, and I've got released a new document on their implementation, which is all about people management and how to kind of include that within it. And that they're acknowledging that actually managing and getting the people involved is just as important as what you're actually delivering itself. And I think this is where schools get it so wrong, is that actually it's important to manage the people and get the people on board and involved in it, not just what it is. Because in theory, it could be anything, but if it's done well, it's going to have a positive impact. But it's also that kind of, are schools identifying the correct things for their schools, and are they listening to the staff? Do you feel like you've been part of the CPD process? Because I think that makes a huge difference. If you as the teachers are kind of involved in what they're picking as their focus and actually listening to that staff voice, does that make you more involved with the CPD itself?
No, that hasn't been something I've been part of recently, being totally honest, because it hasn't been a discussion. And to me, in my ideal little whimsical teacher bubble that I live in, I would love for CPD to be kind of more individualized. It's all very well sticking people in a room and giving them all the same thing, if it's not necessarily relevant for them. And I agree that is a very, in my little whimsical world, that's a very difficult thing to manage. But I also do think, and maybe this is an unpopular opinion, the onus should still be a little bit on those individual teachers. If you want to develop in something, you want to find something, go and find that particular thing with all that free time we have, which I know we don't, but it's, if you want, you wanting to develop is your own thing as well. And much like you, Hannah, a lot of the stuff that I have done in recent times has been off my own back, or I've taken myself to conferences. I've got on planes for things at my own expense, because it's not been quite at the forefront of my school's agenda or whatever it is. So I've kind of done that of my own volition. And interestingly, on the back of that, actually been asked then to deliver workshops, which I always think is quite an entertaining one. But the other thing with this, yes, I do think CPD should be separated from performance management, but at the same time, it needs to be part of a robust appraisal structure. When you are going in to have that conversation with whoever your line manager is, or whoever your next person up is, or whoever's carrying that out, and it needs to be part of that conversation still. It needs to be, there needs to be maybe some accountability there, or some, how did it work? Was it the right kind of thing? Do we need to kind of get other teachers involved in this? So without kind of it becoming sort of something that you're being graded on or looked at in that sense, it still needs to be part of a wider conversation, because otherwise it's all very well going on these courses and doing these things. If you're not going to treat it as part of your development, you're not going to show that it's part of your development as a teacher.
I think there's a lot to delve into that one. It will be interesting to see whether the changes that they've made has a positive impact and keep teachers teaching, because we certainly need a bit of that at the moment. And lastly, on to our shows of the week. Catherine, I'll come to you for your show of the week first.
Yeah, I listened with great interest to Brent and Paul's double header, which they had the 5.5% pay rise and the union view from that, and also Mr. Pink from X talking about the riots and talking about sort of the toxic masculinity and things like that. And I found both sections of the show really, really informative and interesting. I'm a union rep with my union hat on. Sometimes there is a disconnect between what people want to happen on an emotional level and the structure of how strike action works and what can be asked and what you can take to the table. So I find that quite interesting on a technical level, but also, you know, what has been achieved in the position we're in and the next steps. That was a really, really interesting conversation. But in terms of the toxic masculinity, I found Mr. Pink really, really, Mr. Pinkett, sorry. I found him really, really authentic and impassioned about how he talks. He's so open and honest about why he does what he does and taking the CPD into schools. I think we're actually going to get him in my school, which I'm really, really looking forward to in the new year. So, you know, I think it's a really important message that it does us all good to kind of listen to and engage with and join that conversation, because I think if we don't take care of the mental health of teachers with their kind of paying conditions, but also the mental health of boys, young men, and by extension wider society, then we're storing up problems for the future. So both really important conversations.
Wonderful. And Lucy, what's your show of the week?
So in keeping with the theme with our second story today, mine was Tom Rogers' show on the riots and how schools should react, and spoke to two different people. Laura Parker, I believe her name was, I'm just double checking, who is a head teacher, and then one of our own, Yasmin Omar. And Tom asked Laura, which I thought was really interesting, how she was going to kind of handle going back to school and all the rest of it. And sort of rather controversially, well, in my mind, rather controversially, she was sort of not kind of veering away from the idea of maybe having assemblies and things like that, and sort of she's more in the camp of kind of leaving it to teachers, you know, still giving them that support, but you know, trusting them to kind of do their thing, as it were. And then Yasmin kind of talking about the sort of the impact on her and how she feels as well. It's really interesting to kind of hear from both of them in the current climate, and with going back to school in the next sort of few weeks. I think it is well worth a listen if you have the time.
And Brent, finally, what are your show of the week? You're on mute.
You're on mute, Brent.
You're still on mute.
Still talking to himself.
Oh, what's up? I was just saying, I find it ironic that Catherine was talking about Mr. Pink with the new pink hair as well. I like what you did there. Nice tie-in. Xander Loft, so he had his debut show on Saturday Social, and it was quite a debut actually. He started off quite big with the sort of overarching question of what the next 5 years would be, and what the next 5 years would be under a Labour government. So he was looking at the current state of education, the current state of what the plans would be, VAT in schools, and hypothesizing. So it was quite an interesting take, and quite a good debut as well. He had Mark Ravenwood on as his guest, and they sort of chewed the fat over what's currently happening in education and trying to basically sort of surmise what this future government, well, not future government, what the current government is. You have to get your head around the fact, future government, isn't it? Strange, isn't it, that this is actually happening? We have a new government. And but like what, you know, Daniel Kebede the other night, we're in a different mindset and a different reset. So that's a really good take for what potentially changes may occur in the next couple of years, in the next 5 years. But specifically, you know, what would the 6,500 teachers coming in, what's the chances of them staying in education, was this sort of synopsis.
Fab. And my show of the week is Jamie Clark's Saturday show. So he was talking about strengthening the student toolbox. He had most effective learning strategies with much promise, less useful strategies in classroom implementation. So it really covered it all, and it was kind of a good one for getting your maybe wait till the last week of the holiday and watch that one and kind of get your mind back into the ways of the classroom. But thank you very much for joining us on this Sunday morning in your holidays, those of you that have been watching in live. And a big thank you to the sponsors over at John Catt. And don't forget, you can use our sponsorship code. So you can use JCTTR2425 for 20% off your books, and you can go find them at johncatbookshop.com. So if you want a bit of CPD reading, maybe we've inspired you to find your own area and develop yourself, you can go and find those over at there. If you've enjoyed this and maybe you want to consider being a host, we have a few spaces. So do get in contact with us, send us a little message on Twitter or LinkedIn if that's something that you'd be interested in. I love it. I think it's such a great thing to talk about teaching, the good, the bad, and the ugly over here. And it's just such a great team. So do come get involved if that's something that you want to use to enhance your CPD. And we'll be back next week. So enjoy your lovely sunshiny day and this heat wave that is coming in strong. And a big thank you to Lucy, Brent, and Catherine. Enjoy your weekend.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.